Hi, everyone. It's Monday, June 20th, 2016 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Nicole Lentine, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking about making the best of your summer planning time to optimize your fall travel. Well, it may be a little too early to call most schools and set up visits, though that's not always the case. There's still a lot of work that can be done during the summer to help you ease into more targeted fall travel planning as the summer draws to a close. With reports and past numbers at your disposal, there's a few great ways you can use data and history to get yourself organized and make a detailed plan on how to best approach your fall travels. I'm excited to speak with Chris Dorso, Assistant Director of Enrollment Communications at Stony Brook University and my Admissions Live co-host, of course, about this topic today. But first, let's give a shout out to the sponsors that make today's broadcast possible. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All episodes of Admissions Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast form on iTunes. Today's episode is made possible by Chegg Enrollment Services. Chegg Enrollment Services connects colleges and universities with the nearly 80% of the college-bound students who are researching colleges online. Chegg uses an online platform that includes over 10 of the most popular college search sites, helping you to save over 90% on the cost of traditional inquiry generating methods. Email outreach@chegg.com to schedule a free consultation. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Calling all storytellers, M. Stoner is offering a free webinar on storytelling to nurture alumni loyalty and increase donor support. You'll learn techniques for developing stories that support the different phases of an alum and donor's journey. Registration is free, and we're tweeting out a link shortly where you can sign up. So without further ado, I am happy to welcome back on my co-host, Admissions Live co-host, Chris. So Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, what's happening there, internets? If you watch the show at all regularly, you know who I am, and it's not all that terribly surprising. But I'm Chris, and I've been here at Stony Brook for 11 and a half years. I'm a 15-year veteran of the admissions world, and as you know, having hosted this show now for several years, I know what a good resource this can be for everybody here. And I know summer can be slow sometimes in offices. I guess it sort of depends on your office, but summer can, at least in theory, be a little bit of downtime to sort of regroup and take a look at the year gone by and see what is best for next year. You know, kind of what worked and what didn't. And we're deep in the throes of doing that here as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm excited because I know, you bring a lot of admissions experience into this kind of conversation. And I know you don't travel quite as much anymore, but I know you spent, how many years have you traveled for admissions?
So I've been sort of, I've been off the road now for 2 or 3 years, but I did 4 years doing local travel here in and around Long Island, and then it must have been 8-ish years, in and around Connecticut and other parts of New England. So it's, I like to think I have an idea of what goes on the road, and I think what's cool is that having been now on both sides of the road, both being out there every day, leave the office Monday, come back Friday, and being able to be on the back end looking at the statistical side of things and being able to plan and help counselors plan their travel initiatives as well. It's sort of an interesting sort of both ways kind of piece. And it's funny because I work on sort of the communications end, and my supervisor has never stood behind a college fair table in his life. And so, we need someone like me who's sort of seen it both ways, who can look at the data and say, okay, this makes sense, and here's how we can implement it, kind of thing, as opposed to just, oh, hey, we got 7 applicants from this high school in Nebraska. We should go to Nebraska. Well, slow down. So
it's very, very good point. And yeah, I like that you have that experience better in the communication side, because I think you have a little bit more of a critical eye that you can look at both pieces that you're seeing, the conversations that you're having with students too, and make sure that that's kind of being brought into the equation of how admission counselors are going out there, going on the road and talking to students, and how that conversation might be changing. So you get a very unique job that I think not every office has. They're lucky to have that in you. And you kind of mentioned it earlier, summer sometimes is quieter, though I think a lot of offices may not necessarily have that experience right now, but it's obviously a world that every single cycle overlaps. We're still working with the class of 2016, or the class of 2020 technically, but the incoming class that's starting in fall 2016. But we're already shifting our thoughts to this new population of students. And really, if you want to get into kind of the broader thoughts, we've already been thinking about this class probably for a while, but why do you think summer is such an important time to start thinking about fall even this early? I think usually counselors start thinking about it July and August, but why is June and early July, you think, such a good time to start this?
Well, I think it's really because it's the first time that in a lot of cases you've had the time to think about it, because we're so focused in the spring on getting the admissions out and then yielding that class and all of that. And so it's the first time you can sort of take a breath and say, okay, now we need to start thinking about, in a real concrete way, what next year looks like. And going at it from a data perspective, again, we know, for example, and we're not unique in this, so the students who come to visit us year round are in all varying states of the admissions process. And it's an interesting debate for us here in the office every spring, because there's a group of people who are very, and all of a sudden I went dark. Can you still see me?
You did. I can hear you, but I can't still see you.
That's weird. My camera, yep, there I am. Okay, I'm back. That was weird. And so, there's a group of us here in the office that looks at the spring semester as, okay, we are just focusing on yielding this class, and if a junior happens to come visit, who's class of 17 in this case, well, we'll worry about them later, kind of thing, because we're so focused on bringing that spring class in. And so now to be able to really sort of turn the focus and to look formally at that next year's group, there's a sort of a symbolic transition of moving out and restarting of sorts. I guess that's what the cycle is all about.
Yeah, although I don't think many offices have quite the overlap that we see, because you got me thinking. It doesn't even, I'm talking about this in the summer, but you make a good point. We're already talking to these students in the spring, or if you really want to get into web communications and the broader thought process of when students are starting to think about colleges, we're talking with them in their sophomore years. So this could be a cycle that we're really only starting to really go after a little bit more aggressively late spring and into the summertime. But it's true. You kind of got to divide and conquer your attentions a little bit.
Yeah. And that's what I think the importance of the summer piece is that these students are already sort of looking at you. It's not that, okay, we're seeing these students for the first time, because you've probably, hopefully, in theory, already reached out to them electronically. They've already gotten a view book in the mail. They've already gotten emails from you. They've been in your database for 6-8 months, a year in some cases, depending on when their first point of entry was. And so knowing that the students that we're talking with now already very much know something about us, in some cases very formal ways, because they've already been on the mailing lists. This is a group that is ready. They're receptive to discussions. They're receptive to visits. They want to. They're getting ready for senior year in the college process, and we need to meet them halfway and be ready to receive that.
Absolutely. And you kind of bring me into sort of my first big question that I want to ask you about going into this fall travel planning in particular is, where do you start? Do you start with the students who have already done outreach? Do you start with history? Where do you find is going to be the best sort of best starting point for you to really wrap your head around travel?
So when I've done, every year that I really started to look at, I looked at the numbers all year long to looking at, the feeder schools and all those kinds of things. And so there are schools that that are your feeder schools. They're the big schools, whether that's locally or if you have a recruitment territory, they're the schools that you know you're going to get a certain number of applications around. And you need to make sure that you are planning as best you can for those schools, because your target market, your big schools, your feeder schools, there's a reason that you call them feeder schools. And you need to make sure that you're continually refreshing and renewing those relationships, because students change. And whereas the historical trend data is usually very relevant, if I knew that I was going to get, 15 applications from Hall High School in West Hartford, I was generally going to get that from year to year. But I knew I had to keep going back there every year and making sure that I was, continue, because it is new students. And all you need is a counselor to, one of your major advocate counselors to leave or get a new job or whatever. And then all of a sudden that little person who was, your little in there, your in changes, then all of a sudden you have to constantly be renewing that. So you always need to really sort of start around what you know and what you know works, and then sort of build from there.
I like that approach. Yeah, I that's one of the first things that I always do is, especially I find College Board has those great reports that are like ready-made for you that you can run, what's my top 25 feeder schools as an institution. And then you can kind of start digging deeper into your past history with these other schools. And if you get these huge app numbers, or even just significant, it really depends on the state, right? Because you're going to see very different numbers in New York and Connecticut and your surrounding states, where if I'm planning fall travel in Colorado, it's going to be a really different approach. I may not necessarily have as many feeder schools, but I'll have schools that I do have those relationships with. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and that's where really knowing your applicant pool well is so very important, because we had, the divide here, at least on here at Stony Brook, between the domestic admission and international admission. We are not responsible for what happens on the international side. So I worked very little with international applicants, even if they were in my territory. And so there was a boarding school in my territory that one year we literally got 17 applications from. And it was a tiny school. I want to say they had a graduating class of like 40, and 17 of them applied to Stony Brook. And it was one of these things where word got out, and, they found out about us, and it exploded. Because it was an international population, I didn't know about it right away until I, did one of these deeper dives into really looking at the numbers. And our international person didn't necessarily make that connection either. And so we sort of had this weird hole until I finally said, hey, we need to reach out to these folks, and we need to do a visit. Like, we need to get out there, and I'll go and you go, and we go together and we talk about, hey, we see all this great interest in Stony Brook, let's feed that. And so making sure that you're aware of, a school that I never, ever even visited, because it was off in the corner of the state. Sometimes things happen, and even a small school can be a great resource for you, and it may just take one student or one counselor or one parent who sort of, is the tipping point to creating a really great relationship.
Absolutely. And actually, you made me think of something that I think counselors should be aware of if they're doing particular counselor programs, because we keep coming back to the idea of the school counselor. And especially if you're doing any of these summer programs or visit programs for counselors, I heard about a bunch when I was at a conference a few weeks ago. I know we do a few of them. Make sure that they're on there too. If they made all that voyage out to come and see your campus, make sure you're reciprocating and visiting them, because they have that fresh history with you. They're going to remember, oh yeah, in our case, Champlain had this program. I didn't know they had it. And we have these students who might be interested in that. So being cognizant of those relationships too, even if maybe you don't have the student numbers yet, just kind of taking a look at these other visits that you've had from the counseling side.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about the counselor thing, because it's something that is easy to lose. I think those counselor visit programs are extraordinarily valuable. We did a counselor visit program when I first started 11 years ago, and we did it every year. And we did it for a couple of years, and it was gangbusters. And we brought folks in and we bussed them around. It was fantastic. And all of a sudden, it was like, well, we'll cut that for the budget because it was expensive. And like, those counselors would go back and they would talk about what a great experience they had. And they would be like, it was just like a student who comes to a great visit and goes back. And, it's the kind of things that's really worth spending money on. I mean, if we put a lot of money and effort into our campus tour program, why wouldn't we put that, or at least some decent percentage of that same money and effort, into providing support for the counselors to be able to come and visit and all those kinds of things. I mean, we had, speaking of summer, we had our School of Journalism, when they first, they were still a relatively new program here. They've only been around 10 years. And they started doing a summer training program for high school journalism teachers. And we found out about it like through the grapevine, like 2 years after they'd already started it. And we were like, what? Like, you have 30 high school teachers on campus, and like, we need to talk to them. We need to say hello. We need to get them stuff. And so like those kinds of relationships can very much happen in the summer. And it's easy for those things to happen in the summer, because if there's something already going on campus, then you can feed around that and include those kinds of things. We have a film festival next month on campus. Shoot out an invite, the invitational information to our counselor database, to our local counselor database. People think of us as a science school. They may not even know we have a film festival on campus. And so, get the information out there that may not necessarily even be admissions specific, but will draw people to campus.
It's a really, really good point. I feel like, well, I did a while back a show about fostering that relationship with school counselors, but I think it's one that might need to revisit in the near future, because it's so true. I think it's so weird though that the school didn't decide that was an important point to mention to the admissions office, that they had counselors on campus. But
I'm not bitter at all. Not bitter at all.
Clearly.
Cool.
Clearly over it.
I think the other challenge when it comes to fall planning is, because there are so many events, like, it's so easy to get sort of sucked into the calendar. Mm-hmm. And, okay, I know that, you're planning things around a NACAC fair, you're planning things around a couple of major college nights and things like that. And that makes a lot of sense. And it's certainly something to make life easier. If you know that, we knew every year the Hartford National at the end of March, beginning of April, we knew it was always going to be there. We always knew when it was going to be there. One of the tricky parts was all the other area high schools also knew, we've got a couple hundred college counselors who are coming into town for the National. Let's have our college night the night before the National College Fair. And all of a sudden you had 6 college nights the night before the National, which, at least for the school district, makes a lot of sense, because, we can reach out to the schools that are coming. But for us, it's to say, okay, there are 3 important high schools for us, all of whom have college nights on the same night, and there's only one of me. And so, that's the sort of the side challenge of figuring out how to take what's there from the college night or the college fair or the consortiums or whatever, and then build around that in a way that makes sense for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Have you ever found that you've gone back and looked at past travel calendars and tried to figure out, this travel day was really, really rough. This worked. I've looked in the past myself, and sometimes I've questioned why I've made certain decisions, but other times I'll see like, actually it really helped me to go half an hour outside of Hartford, when I knew everybody else was going to be there. So do you ever kind of revisit your specific calendar, or do you kind of treat each year as a new one?
Yeah, I always revisit the calendar, because that's the joy of being on the road for more than one season is you get to know where things are. And I remember the incredible frustration my first year or two on the road, where I'd have a visit, at a school X, and then I'd be driving to school Y, and school Z, I drive literally right past it. I didn't even realize. I was like, I'm going to be there next week. I wish I had realized that it was right there. And it was that point where I had I had an Excel spreadsheet that I had all of my schools laid out in, and Excel is what it is, but it does a nice job. And I actually coded the schools with like rough map coordinates in my head, so that not quite by county, but sort of by area. And I used the old the EPS designations, the EPS 1 and all that. And so there, even within there, I had sort of subgrouping. So it's like, okay, I've got these 3 schools out of this group of 7 schools that are in this one same general area. I've got 3 of them on this day. I got to get a 4th school from this group, and so there was a limited range of me, and it just to make life easier, so I'm not driving all over the place, to make it make sense. And then I know Okay, and then it's easy to tweak. You could say, all right, once I've done this for a year or two, I know that these two areas are right next to each other. And if I need to, cross between the areas, that's easy to do because I know how to do that. If you're traveling New York City, if you're traveling, really any urban sort of setup where you're dealing with traffic and or bridges in the case of some cities, having that geographic piece is oh so very, very important because at least in the New York metro area, to be able to hit a bunch of schools that are close to each other together makes all the difference in the world. And it may seem like a mile and a half on the map to get from one school to the next school, but if there's, a major construction zone or there's a major highway in the way or whatever, that's, asking for disaster. And maybe that's just New York. I don't know. I'm assuming the West Coast is probably like that too, the LA schools and whatnot. I've never had the joy of recruiting out in LA, but you really have to think about the geographic piece of the travel setup.
Oh, 100%. I learned that the hard way the first time I traveled in Connecticut and New Jersey my first year, and just going through the Bronx alone that many times, I really learned a very valuable lesson in trying to plan weeks that I wasn't in two different states in 1 week if I could help it. But I like your kind of area coding idea. I didn't get that nitty gritty with coordinates necessarily, but I actually did a similar thing in Connecticut where I broke the state up into the 8 counties that were there, and I actually had a color for each county, and I color coded it that way in an Excel spreadsheet that I had my visits on. And so at a glance, if I knew that I had 2 visits that I was going to do in Fairfield County on a certain day, then I could kind of look at another spreadsheet I had of schools that I wanted to book, and they were in that same color coding, and I could very quickly go, okay, Fairfield County's purple. Let me find the purple schools. Let me see if I can get something that's going to be a lot closer. So I do think that can be a method that can really help a lot. And especially if you start to develop that kind of history in your mind, even of remembering these visits, it's going to help to be able to plan that a little bit better. And I mean, there's schools in Colorado, there's 2 high schools that are pretty much on the same road. So I'm just foolish if I don't do those on the same day.
Right.
Not everybody might necessarily know that going in there. Right. So yeah.
And the good thing is, like, the on the school counselor side, they generally know that, which is nice. And I have absolutely had counselors, when I've called, and I haven't been afraid to ask either, especially when I was really just getting started, to be able to say, hey, if I leave you at 9:15 that day, will it be reasonable for me to get to school Y by 9:30? And they'll say, no, that's going to be virtually impossible because of traffic or because of whatever. And so, they're partners with you in this, and they don't want you showing up late to them. They don't want you being, delayed to your second school. So, don't be afraid to ask questions from, the folks who know it best, the counselors who live it and do it, because they're a fantastic resource. And then you're just relationship building. It's a conversation. It's not a sales pitch. It's a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've found counselors more than happy to be like, oh yeah, you'll never make it there on time. Or they'll be like, actually, you'll get here with plenty of time that you can go down the road to this really great restaurant that you should.
Yes, exactly right.
Which is my favorite. So counselors, keep doing that. Love it when you do that. Just to shift away, because I feel like we're starting to get into that space of this is a little bit maybe later in the season when you actually can get a counselor on the phone, which doesn't necessarily happen in June and July as much, though some schools do have paid people that work through the summer, whether it's the same counselors or somebody else is answering the phone. I feel like I've seen different things at different times. But even before you get to that point where you're making calls, as far as like reports and things that you're running at this point, in June, do you have particular, factors or characteristics you're looking at when you're looking at these prospects that have already raised their hand and said, yes, I'm interested? How do you use that data or past data too, your enrolled students and everything? What have you found to be the most helpful numbers for you to try to wrap your head around things?
For us, being who we are as a competitive research university, there are lots of schools, near and far, that we get great application numbers, but very few admits and very few matriculating students. And so, that's sort of, as I said at the outset, if it's a school that we get a good number of strong applicants from, those are key schools for us. If it's a school where we get a lot of applicants, but we're not admitting a lot of applicants, that's a situation where I'll usually make an effort to reach out to the counseling staff in a more formal kind of a way. Those are schools that are sort of those next where the awareness is certainly there. They know they're applying, you're in their heads, but for whatever reason, the students are not able to get through the admissions gauntlet. And so for us, that's a, hey, Counselor X, let's, how about we bring in lunch? We'll bring in breakfast to a staff meeting and we'll chat and we'll talk about, what we do, a little more about the school, about the programs, all those kinds of things, so they can get a better sense of, are we sending the right information to our students about your school, or are we just confusing them because, getting 17 applications and admitting nobody doesn't help anyone, quite frankly. I mean, I know we all want to, our numbers and whatnot, but if we can get good applicants, that's really your best case scenario.
I really want to highlight that point you just made, because I heard a really great bit of kind of an anecdote from another counselor at a conference I was at a few weeks ago at NEACAC. And a counselor had that kind of situation. Actually, it was at the feeder school, though, that they were getting tons of applicants, decent numbers there, and then nobody enrolled, and they couldn't figure out, well, what's happening? Why aren't we getting these students? There's a disconnect there. Talked with the counselor and realized that none of these students figured that it was affordable for them. So, some applied, some didn't even make it that far. They only saw them at the visit and then never heard from them again. And so she dug a little bit deeper, found out this kind of disconnect with financial aid, and she changed her approach at that school as a result. She started doing more of kind of seminars at the school related to financial affordability. She started to kind of dig deeper into, okay, this is the information gap there. So I like that you shared that, because I think there's more we can be doing than just our typical kind of walk-in college pitch kind of conversations. We can be providing even more value to these schools that we're visiting, depending on what their needs are and what the students do and don't know.
Yeah. And again, now is really the time to look at that. We had a great conversation a couple weeks ago with our marketing folks. We have a new VP for marketing here on campus, and we've done a lot of new creative sorts of things on the marketing end. And he asked us, are there areas that you're trying to target where they can help, where, some sort of targeted advertising presence may be of a benefit, whether it be like, we think very heavily here, we look at mass transit a lot because of the subway and the Long Island Railroad and all those kinds of things. And so if there's an area where even, sticking a billboard in a subway station near where a lot of our students and parents and influencers may see it, during a more targeted time, well, they've got to plan that now. And not for nothing, they're planning budgets now for next year too. And so to be able to say, we're going to be in this area for this major college fair or whatever, this may be something where a little nudge might help, where you're keeping your institution front of mind a little more than it ordinarily would be. You have those discussions now, because you can't have that discussion 2 weeks before. You've got to start that, from an advertising perspective now.
That's a great point, and actually brings me to a larger question is, beyond advertising and things like that, what kinds of communication do you think is valuable to have with students right now, beyond this kind of mass advertising, but what kind of outreach, whether it be social, whether it be email, whether it be calls, do you think is most valuable to do right now?
I mean, it seems like every, there's the whole email is dead thing, but yet every e-expectations report and, everything else says that email is still king. And so it's a matter of doing it well and doing it right, making sure you're not violating any can spam laws or making sure that you're putting the right information out there, not too much information out there, so that it's saturation. I mean, students are getting hundreds and hundreds of emails from hundreds and hundreds of schools, and there's a lot of noise out there. And if you're not already on their radar, it's hard to get on their radar via email. So you really kind of have to be creative in how you do things. We got search a view book in the mail. A colleague got a view book in the mail for a school that's not a competitor of ours, but a colleague of ours. And we looked through it and we said, all right, so this is what they're saying. Like, what could we get from this? Like, what do we like from, what our competitor schools and other schools in our in our academic space are doing. And so, to be aware of what else is out there is, I think, very important, to know what other schools are doing. There are, just tons of, like you mentioned, the conference thing, and this is obviously conference season, and it's late at this point because a lot of the conferences have already come and gone, at least here in the Northeast. And there's such great value in the ACACs and SUNY Cap for those of us in the New York system. And so to be able to use as a resource and know that, okay, what we're doing makes sense, and exchange of ideas and all that. And yes, we compete with each other, but we're all in the same business together. And so knowing what other schools are doing can really be instructive. I apologize, we've got construction next door.
No worries. And I do love that about higher ed, is I feel like we are more willing to openly communicate these ideas and these things that didn't work than a lot of other industries might be. Granted, I've only been in this industry, so I may be wrong, but I feel like there's a lot of open dialogue that happens that I think it's cool to see that in the end, we all just want that same happy result of students being at the right place for them, and having the consideration of financial aid and everything else in there, of course, is part of that conversation too, but just helping these students. That's what one of the things that I really like about the ACACs in particular, the ACAC and NACAC, is that it's not just admissions professionals, but it's the school counseling side too. So I know it's, like you said, it's a little late, so maybe people can't get there, but in the future, if that hasn't been something that's on your priority list and your school supports you to be able to go, by all means, take advantage of that, because you might be hearing a lot of things that are working at other schools that might work for you. And keeping your mind open to what other businesses and organizations are using too, as ways to encourage you to open your email, to check out tweets that they're sending out. Don't stick within higher ed. I think that's another important point too.
Very much.
Yeah. And I have to vouch for your Stony Brook accounts, Chris, because you guys have such a great sense of humor behind your accounts. So I know that prospective students don't necessarily pay as much attention to our social accounts as accepted students do. But if people watching the show aren't already following you guys, they definitely should, because I always get a giggle out of your tweets. To vouch.
It's funny. I helped someone today. There was she didn't even add us. It just came up in my search. It was something about, why everybody I call there is so cursing rude. And so I was like, hey, what's up? And she was like, oh, this is fantastic. And within half an hour, she had gone from cursing our name publicly to, oh my God, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. So, the reason that we started on social 7, 8, 9 years ago was because prospective students, it was another avenue for prospective students to get information about us. And we wanted, we knew they were out there, and we just wanted to make sure that we were getting good information. And so make sure they were getting good information, I should say. And so, that social is as good a venue as any other, because it's in the space where they are. And if you have the resources and the manpower to do it and to do it well, it can be extremely valuable to you.
Oh, absolutely. I will vouch for it 100 times over. The value of social listening and just knowing what's being said out about your school cannot be understated. I think we're preaching to choir at this point in time, but in case you're not already doing social listening, you absolutely should be. Just to kind of go into a realm that can be hotly debated at times, have you found value in using reports of like best high schools or anything like that? I know that there's a U.S. News and World Report for colleges, but there's also similar things for high schools. Do you ever find you're using those or any other reports out there when you're planning your fall travels, or do you just kind of stick with what you know?
I've tended to stick with what I know, because if I was a younger counselor who didn't really know, or if you're trying to break into a new territory or new area, it's probably a good place to start, I think. But the problem with those kinds of things is that all of a sudden those become magnets for everybody, and so you want to be in there and you want to be part of that mix, and that's certainly important. But if you've got a high school that's already got a pretty strong college-going population, and they're in one of your target markets, then you should be already on their radar already. So it's important to think about those kinds of things, but I've never used it in any real formal, concrete way.
All right. That makes sense. We kind of talked a little bit about some changes you've seen over the last few years, but aside from the big shift of kind of thinking carefully about what message you're sharing at schools and things like that, have you seen any other kind of significant shifts or smaller shifts over the years that you did travel, and kind of how you changed, how you approached it, significant things that seem to be larger trends in higher ed, anything like that, of how it's changed even in the last decade or so?
Well, I think the big shift now is that students are, they seem to me, and I'd have to run the numbers, but the numbers for us, students are less forthcoming with their personal information as they once were. Students, in a lot of cases, are just as happy to take your stuff and say, no problems, I'll fill it out online or I'll check it out. And there was actually a point where locally we didn't even we tried not even bringing inquiry cards for a little while. And just to see we did at some targeted schools to see if we would get some response from, to seeing if we could just direct people to the web. I don't really know. But, and that's sort of the joy of the scanners at the NACAC fairs, where you're getting information and it's much easier for them to just beep than it is to sit there and fill out a card with that you can't read what they've written. But you've got to have your elevator speech, if you will. You've got to have the ability to grab a student quickly, or a parent quickly, or a counselor quickly, because there's so much noise out there, and they'll, as I said, they're coming in with some knowledge already in a lot of cases, and you've got to make sure that you're helping to feed that in a way that is easily digestible and is informational and gets the right stuff out there quickly, because you don't have the time now. There's too much out there, and so you want to make sure that you're really on top of that.
Yeah. We've been seeing the same things. I think, especially this spring, it seemed to really show a significant change in the way that students are taking information versus the way they're providing their contact information. I'm really interested to see how that trend goes over the next few years. I think we are going to see a pretty drastic change in inquiry and prospect numbers than we did before. Or if we continue to see the same numbers, I think their sources are going to look really different. Maybe we'll still get search names. That's always going to be a thing that we're going to see. But really, specifically in travel, I really think I echo what you're saying. I think students are wising up to, I don't want to be slammed with crazy mail, and I don't want you to know where I live unless I really, really like you. So yeah, it's interesting to see how that is going to change, especially for this fall and future springs from here on out.
Yeah, I really do wonder, and I've wondered for years about the future of the college fair, as we've known it since, I did it in high school 20-some years ago, and what the college fair will look like going forward. And will we do the same kinds of things, standing behind the table in a high school gym? Is there enough value in it for us as a school to pay to fly someone to Virginia or Chicago or whatever and stand behind a table and you hit, 15 high schools over the course of the week? Or can that money be better spent doing something electronically, doing outreach, buying names in the right way, getting people to come to us differently, as opposed to standing behind the table in the gym? And I think schools are starting to think in that direction, the sort of the value proposition of what it is to be on the road, and the cost factor involved there. But at the same time, I think those relationships are important. And I think, we're not there yet. You can't completely forego being on the road, because it will fall apart. You need to be there and present to get the most bang for your dollars.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I do think there is value, like you said, in kind of seeing if things are working, and maybe, not walking away entirely from the college fairs yet. But I'm even thinking of a colleague who is out in Colorado the same time as I was this past fall, and she was doing some of the fairs, but not all of them. And in between, she was doing more interview days than anything else. She was kind of cutting back on the high school visits, cutting back on some of the fairs, and doing some really, really targeted stuff that, as far as I know, worked for them. But they were a different institution than we were. I don't think I would have seen the same success doing the things that they were doing. So it really, you kind of sometimes have to dig a little bit deeper too, and look at what is your institution's mission, what are your institution's goals. If I'll use Champlain as an example. One of the biggest tenets of who we are is that idea of kind of that human touch, that human relationship. And so I find it incredibly important for me to be able to meet as many of the students that are going to apply in my territory as I can, so I can know who they are and they have me as that resource and that contact. So I've found that I am doing certain things on the road as a result of that kind of bigger mission as an institution.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to sort of bring it back to the summer piece and using your knowledge of your past travel territory. I mean, there were plenty of schools where the first 3 or 4 years it made sense to visit because it was a big population, or it was, you know, a school that seemed to fit and all the reports said it would fit. And either the visit sucked because the school, you know, just didn't treat visitors well, you know, or whatever, you know, you didn't get anything out of it. And being able to say to yourself and then to the folks to whom you report, okay, I know that, you know, I did, you know, 79 visits last fall, but, you know, looking at what I've actually gotten out of these visits, it may be more beneficial for us to maybe cut back to 60 visits and maybe use that money rather than spending a week to do this, do a couple of counselor programs or whatever to, you know, to think outside the box a little bit and shake things up. You know, nobody says you have to visit the same schools the same way every year just because that's what you do. You know, if there's a school that you visited 3 years in a row and you're sitting in the cafeteria and you're not talking to anybody, it's a waste of your time. So, you know, either find another way to hit that school or cross it off your list and go back in a year or two when, you know, maybe things look a little different. You know, make sure that you're using your time most efficiently. You know, it's not just a matter of can I squeeze 5 visits into a day, it's can I have productive visits in that day. You know, if I get much more out of 3 good schools than 5 meh schools, I'd much rather visit 3 good schools and, you know, spend an hour at Starbucks in the interim, you know, responding to emails or whatever.
Absolutely. And you kind of tapped right into that last question I was going to ask you. Before I do kind of go a little bit further with one last question, I just do want to put out there to our viewers, if you have any questions, make sure you're using the Higher Ed Live hashtag to ask them. I've been keeping an eye on Twitter just in case. But you kind of started to answer my question, I guess, already. But have you found with each passing year that you were traveling less, or were you just finding that you were traveling more effectively, but still on the road at the same time? I mean, did you see a significant change in the time in the road, or, you know, did it look significantly different?
Yeah, I think there's a definite difference on the road because, you know, you do get smarter about what you're doing and, you know, knowing, you know, the best way to spend your time at high schools and the most efficient way to get from place to place, you know, point blank, you know, knowing that, you know, it's not reasonable for me to hit 5 schools in this day. It's more reasonable for me to hit 3 because of driving distance or efficiency or whatever. And, you know, being able to make the best value out of your day on the road. It's a weird job that we have. Like, you know, there were days when, you know, your first visit is at 7:45 or 8 o'clock in the morning and you're sort of going till early afternoon, and then you have this weird 4 or 5 hour break, and then you're working again from 6 to 9 at night. And so, you know, if you're really cramming in visits, like you're zonked by 2 o'clock and you're not your best self, and then you're a complete waste product by the afternoon. So, you know, you want to make sure that you're making the most of your visits in a way that makes the most sense. And so look back at what you've done and make notes to yourself, you know, like as you're traveling. Like I used a paper calendar for years because I would literally write little notes right in the paper calendar to be able, you know, names, phone numbers, great visit, you know, great restaurant around the corner, whatever, so that when time comes to make the visits for the following year, there's something physical right in front of you. And if it's easier for you to do that electronically or whatever, that's fine. But, you know, make sure that you're using your knowledge and putting that the right way going forward.
Absolutely. And to put in a plug, if you are somebody who is leaving your institution and going to another school, or just leaving the professional entirely, be kind and leave those notes behind for the people who scoop up your territory after the fact. Because, you know, I've been one who's gone into a territory blind, and it is terrifying. And I've also gone into a territory that has had copious notes, and it has been so wonderful to have. So be kind to your fellow travelers after the fact.
And if you're in a position where, you're supervising a team of recruiters, encourage them to do that, and encourage those notes to be, saved on a Google Drive somewhere or whatever, so that, they are there. Because ultimately, I decide to quit tomorrow. You know what? Tough noogie, Stony Brook, you're on your own. But, to make sure you have that institutional knowledge going forward, from the supervisory level, make sure that you've got those systems in place so that the history can continue.
Absolutely. I didn't expect to have tough noogies said on this broadcast, but you never know what to expect.
2.5 years, and I think that's the first time I've used tough noogies in a broadcast.
Well, I appreciate that it was on one of my episodes. Thank you for that. Well, I haven't seen any questions out there on Twitter, although they should know how to find you. Both our handles are in our lower thirds on the screen here. But do you have any final thoughts or anything else you want to leave us with, Chris?
No, I want to say thank you for working with the Higher Ed Live community over the course of the last 2.5 years. This is my sort of temporary finale to Higher Ed Live. And I love the show. I love what we do, marketing and advancement, and the whole team here at Higher Ed Live is fantastic. And so thanks to Mallory and Ashley and Michael and the whole crew at M. Stoner. It's a great group to work with. And Nicole, you're a superstar. And there will be a new me this time next month hosting Admissions Live. And so, we'll welcome Mr. Castro to the team, and I'll let you guys run from there, but I'm not going too far because you'll see me guest hosting now and then. So I'll be around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not going to go too far, but thank you, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure being a co-host with you. I will miss you, but I am excited to welcome on new host and everything. But yeah, you're not going too far. You're gonna be coming back for a few episodes down the road. I know it for a fact. You can't escape. So thank you again, Chris, and thanks as always to our program sponsors, Chegg and M. Stoner. Tune into Admissions Live on Monday, July 11th for a conversation about prior year in the FAFSA with our new host, Adam Castro, and guests from looks like NAFSA, but we're going to still see who our guests are going to be, so stay tuned. I'll be back on July 18th, and we'll be talking about texting and admissions. We're actually going to revisit a show from the past. So stay up to date with upcoming episodes from Higher Ed Pros by subscribing to the newsletter at higheredlive.com. Thanks, Chris. Bye, everybody.